Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this football season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection for a wide variety of statistics, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and an enormous selection of players and stat options are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million football fans who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/get100 and use code GET100. That's code GET100 at prizepicks.com/get100 for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.
You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods, where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night.
Welcome to the Jester Section Hiker Podcast, where we talk about the continual pursuit of the section hiker.
And I'll spread the word, and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
Hey everybody, it's Jester. Thanks for coming back to the podcast. Before we start the show, I wanted to thank one of our listeners, Cliff, for sending me the book America's Great Hiking Trails by Karen Berger. This book contains amazing pictures and commentary on each of our 11 national scenic trails. After looking through this book, I got to thinking that on this podcast, we have had section hikers from 7 of the 11 national scenic trails. I think it would be awesome to have section hikers from all 11 national scenic trails featured before the 1-year anniversary of the podcast, which is December 1st, 2020. So if you know anyone out there section hiking the New England Trail, Potomac Heritage Trail, Arizona Trail, or the Natchez Trace, please send them my way. We do have a Florida Trail section hiker coming your way soon, so we have that one covered. Cliff, I really appreciate you sending me that awesome book. I have another big announcement after today's guest, so hang on for that. I am pretty sure you will like what I'm going to say. Now on to the show. Welcome back to Jester's Section Hiker, the premier podcast with the spotlight on section hikers. I'm your host, Julie Jester Gayhart, and this is the podcast where you will hear stories about everyday people who, in addition to their everyday lives, make the commitment to hike long-distance trails where every section is a new beginning. Today's guest on the podcast began her section hiking of the Pacific Crest Trail back in 2008 with a local hiking group in California. Since 2008, she has spent time not only section hiking the PCT, but also the Arizona Trail, Continental Divide Trail, and the Pacific Northwest Trail. Her mantra is that she doesn't do anything in advance, loves cherry picking her sections, and loves being somewhat of a gypsy. Please welcome with me to the podcast, Jaunting Jan, or out on the trails as BeeKeeper.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Appreciate you coming on, Jan. And before we get started, I'm just going to go ahead and tell the listeners, we have been through it trying to get this this episode recorded. We started a couple of days ago, and now it is 9 a.m. for me, which is not bad, but 6 a.m. On the West Coast for Jan. So I really, really appreciate you doing this. The internet seems to be good, so I think we're good to go.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to it. And yes, technical difficulties are always fun. Hiking is a lot more fun.
Well, exactly. Hiking's a lot more fun. So let's start this off by, first of all, I want to thank you, Jan, because we're going to talk about this in the podcast, but you are actually one of the administrators. You actually started the PCT section hiking group page on Facebook, and you've been a very strong advocate for the podcast. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. And I am definitely a proponent for both Facebook groups where we can support networking each other as well as podcasting and spreading the word.
Perfect. And again, I cannot thank you enough for that. And then second of all, when you and I first started chatting like late fall, early beginning of 2020 and talking about having you on the podcast, you actually sent me your hiking resume. And and okay, people, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, it is an actual resume, just like you would for a job interview or anything like that. And it actually, we laugh, but it actually got me started thinking, I need to put together a hiking resume, because when I leave teaching, and I've been talking about this on the podcast, you know, I may actually want to start a career in hiking and doing something. So thank you for that, Jan. I'm going to start putting that together. And no better way than to question you on the podcast than to go down through your resume. And the first thing on there is you grew up right on the Pacific Crest Trail or near it and didn't know it. So tell us about that story.
So my dad worked for the Forest Service, and we grew up right on the Oregon border, the California side of the Oregon border. And my dad's job in the Forest Service was going to all the lookouts in the area. And he took care of the radio equipment. So we spent a lot of time traveling around, camping, hiking, being out and about in our local forests. And interestingly enough, this is a sort of a rare opportunity. My mom also grew up on a lookout in that area. How cool is that? I know. So that was sort of the beginning of my interest in the great outdoors and the Forest Service and all of that. I didn't know about the PCT. Here it was being built. And later what I found out is it really was a very youthful trail, barely existing while I was growing up. It wasn't officially completed until 94 or 92 or something in the early 90s. And I was completely out of high school by then and everything. But thank you to the value of Facebook, later on, I found out that a high school classmate actually helped build it. And I'm like, how did I sort of know you and didn't know that you were doing the PCT and knew about this whole lifestyle? We were outdoors people, but I knew nothing about it.
Okay. So there are several things I want to ask you based on what you just said. First of all, I have got to ask you about your mom living, basically in a fire tower, right? Is that what I'm gathering?
Yes. And the really cool thing is this is during World War II. And her parents were required to be Japanese warplane spotters, and my grandma actually saw one.
Wow. Okay, so I'm going to have you back on, and we're in the fall, and we're going to talk about that. Is amazing.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah. So she had to take a train to go to school, and then she would come back every few months, like school holidays. And she did that until she was like in second or third grade.
Wow. What stories in your family and what memories? I mean, that is amazing. So you grew up in the wilderness. I mean, it sounds like your parents were amazing and you have all this outdoor background, but it was actually 2008 or 2010, around that time frame, where you actually put your own boots on the ground, so to speak, on the PCT. So talk to us about your first introduction. I know you did some things with some meetup groups and things like that. You learned about trail magic. So talk to us about your first boots on the ground experience on the PCT.
Yeah, so I had my career and I didn't feel like I had very good life balance, and it was time to find myself again. And so found out about, it was kind of a little bit before meetup groups. We had this group in town that was called We Ski Too. And back in the day, I was a skier and it was called We Ski. And so they had evolved into this We Ski Too because we want to hike and we want to do something during the off ski season. So I joined them for their first hike, and it happened to be on the PCT. And I was like, wow, it was only maybe an hour from my house. And I said, well, this is pretty awesome. And then I was hooked again, and I'd been searching for something. So in November of 2008, I put out the feelers and I found Meetup, but Meetup didn't have anything in my area yet. They're like, too bad, too sad. End of November, I get an email saying, guess what? A new adventure group has been started in your area. And it ended up being the most perfect thing ever for me. They filled my calendar. I had the most wonderful organizer. She just was looking for a few friends, and we ended up having this amazing core of friends. Pretty soon we had 1,000 members, but the beginning core of our friends, one of the gals, she was involved in doing IT maintenance at Lassen Volcanic National Park. And her guy friend at the time, and now they've been partners for 10 years, I think, or something, they scheduled an outing at the halfway point of the PCT. And that's near Drakesbad. And I know that that's been on your show previously. And the owners at the time, or the caretakers at the time, just loved PCT hikers. Well, my friend Beth, she knew them very well. So she set us up to do an introduction to the PCT, camping, hiking, trail magic, everything event. And it was the most amazing thing. And I just fell in love. We had this group. We got to meet Billy and Ed, who were the hosts. They welcomed these PCT hikers. You wouldn't even believe it. Like, these skinny, scrawny people came walking in, and they would hug them. They gave them their laundry bag and said, put your clothes in here. Let me give you some food and drink. Send them over they had a hot springs fed pool. There was a shower there. Send them to do their shower, their laundry, into the pool. Then this was sort of rich resort, but that's country. It's very low scale, but it's the rich people that come and stay there in these little cabins. And so they have a dining area store. Well, they have picnic tables outside for the stinky hikers. And so they have all these rich people, and it's expensive. At that time, I remember this, it was $26 for dinner, which was quite expensive in 2009 or 10. And going, I don't know if I should be spending this. And of course I was still working.
Yeah, that's expensive now for dinner.
I know. And that was like, exactly. And here you are in this camping cabin-y kind of place. So we're like, of course we're going to do this. Well, you have to sit outside of these picnic tables because that's where the stinky people sit. Oh my gosh. The halfway point of the PCT, they could buy all this alcohol. They were drinking, celebrating. Ed and Billy were so wonderful. They would just be giving all the leftovers from all these rich people that didn't really eat all their food out. They would buy tons of piles of pancakes. So we got to meet all these people. It was great. The first day we had done our first hike, and we were doing this one short trail. The very first person I met, and I had brought homemade trail mix bars to give out and fruit. And the first guy I meet is from Australia. And I'm like, Israel. And I'm like, really? I get to meet a foreigner my first time. And we had such a great time. And that night we had a great time meeting everybody. And as we're sitting around the campfire, my friend says, and of course we've been talking about trail names, and my friend says, "You're Queen Bee." And I'm like, no, I'm not Queen Bee. I'm Queen Bee at work. I'm not going to be Queen Bee in my trail life. And she says, no. Like, you're the keeper of the bees. You're the person that schedules all these meetup events. You get out there and encourage people to come and attend with us. You want them to be part of our tribe, and you want to make it fun. So you're really like the keeper of the bees. So you're the beekeeper. And I'm like, okay. And I went with it.
I love that. I got to tell you, Jan, since we're being totally transparent with the listeners, with our technical difficulties, we are actually recording this amid the COVID-19 situation. We are literally, 6-7 weeks in, and it just really warmed my heart to hear you say that story, because, I am truly hoping one day we can get back to that place where we are gathering, we are sharing food with all types of people from all over everywhere. And that right there is what I miss about hiking the most right now. Not actually physically. You could get your physical exercise while you're at home, but that camaraderie and that stuff that happens out on the trail. So thank you for sharing that. And hopefully the listeners will be agreeing and shaking their heads with us as we are now. So.
Yes, because you're absolutely right. That does make a difference. And having done more trail magic since then. I mean, I got that bug, and I started I became the roving trail magic person, and I would recruit people in my meetup group and say, let's go hiking and let's give out treats. And so we knew where they were in our area as the sort of the herd came through, and we would hike toward them with our backpacks full of ice chests and cold beverages, because the time they would come through our area, it would be extremely hot. It's usually July-ish, and it's hot. It's 100 degrees, over 100. And so we had icy things, and it was great. It was so much fun to introduce so many people in my group to what trail magic is and the PCT.
Perfect. And I'm going to switch to calling you the BeeKeeper, because I just think that's awesome. So in total, it seems that you've done about 1,500 miles of the PCT. So you called these the highlights or not so highlights of your backpacking trips. So let's go through some of these highlights and not so highlights.
Okay.
In 2012, you had your first multi-night section and solo backpack. So talk to us about that multi-night section and going out there solo, because I know some people that won't hike because they won't go solo. So talk to us about that.
Okay. So my first section actually wasn't solo. It was with a few friends through Meetup, and it was on the Tahoe section. So everybody kind of knows that it's the Desolation Wilderness area. You start at Highway 50 and you go to Interstate 80. And I was excited. It was going to be a multi-night. The only bad thing was the guy that was coordinating it, I had actually done another trip on the Lost Coast with him, and things had not gone so well. And I was very concerned. He was not a great group leader, and he didn't have good group dynamics. So I had quite the stern talk with him after that. The other guy that was in our group, he was also on that trip, and he and I were partners. We were like, we will take care of each other. We will not abandon each other. And we don't trust this guy, but let's give it another go. We've talked to him. And of course, the trip started out just the same as the Lost Coast trip did. We decided he was kind of having a midlife crisis, and it was a personality issue, and his style was not going to match our style. This other guy and I, we had done a lot of hiking together in the backcountry of my backyard, and we knew we were very compatible. And this guy was like not going to be it. So it was interesting going at different speeds, going at having different philosophies, and learning that what people say is not what they mean. And that wasn't something that I'd really had in my life. I really sought out people. And even in my work career, I really was able to distinguish people that said what they meant. And this guy didn't. So that was a good learning experience. I had done lots of pieces of the PCT in my area since then and during that time. And I really wanted to do another section. Well, there's two other main sections that if you ask a PCT hiker, what are their favorite sections? One of them is the Goat Rocks in Washington. And I had seen the photos and I was like, that is my kind of place. I have to experience this. So I spent the winter planning with my friends. Let's go to Goat Rocks. Let's go spend a week. Let's just make this vacation. But of course, as things happen, one by one, they all dropped out.
Yep.
And I was down to my final person. And so it was going to be this other friend and he had gotten really sick. And he had a respiratory thing, much like the coronavirus. And I'm like,
oh no, everything now is just going to be.
I know. And he so wanted to go. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't have you go. Like, this is too important to me. Like, I don't get vacations and I need to do this. And so I said, I'm sorry. And I knew that it was a prime hiker season and that if something were to happen, there would be somebody there. Worst case scenario. And so I arranged a ride. It was my first time to figure out a shuttle. And I ended up in kind of this crazy shuttle situation, but it finally worked. And that was the beginning of kind of craziness, but I was like, okay, you just got to go with the flow. Like, it's out of your control. And that was kind of good for me. And then I, got there and loved it and met people. And the really awesome, probably one of the most awesome things was there were two couples that I had provided trail magic to in Northern California in July. And I was there, I think in early September, late August or something. And I met them again. And one of them in particular, they went to the top of this peak and they got engaged. And I took their photos and watched their packs while they did that. And so I got to be part of their engagement story. And this other couple, I camped with them one night and they're still together. So both those couples are still together. They're both Facebook friends. And it was so fun to have provided Trail Magic and then been part of the gang, been part of my tribe.
Awesome. That is awesome. And what's interesting is I think now, okay, so we're in 2020 and you had these early on experiences and, you pretty much figured out who you don't want to hike with, your hiking style and where you wanted to go hiking, and you're the BeeKeeper. But I kind of want to skip ahead because now you are what I would call a soloist. You do your own thing, you call yourself a gypsy, so to speak, because you take trips and most of it is alone now. Am I correct on that? You might, tag on with some people that you know in various areas. So talk to us. I'd love to hear about that transition from all the group stuff to now you're the lone gypsy, so to speak.
Yeah. So it kind of just evolved because if you would have asked me 10 years ago, what are you going to do when you stop working? This would not have even been close to my radar. I guess now it's getting closer to 15, but whatever. It was never, ever even a thought in my mind that I would travel or that I would hike and backpack. But somehow that evolved over that time. And I just fell in love with hiking and backpacking. And then I figured, okay, I've got all this time. I stopped working and I said, I'm going to see where I can go. Well, the very first opportunity that presented, I was a Gossamer Gear ambassador, and there was a get together in Moab in January of 2015. And I'm like, okay, you said you're going to be an opportunist. If there's an opportunity for you to go do something, go do it. There's no reason you're not working. Let's do it. And I felt intimidated, like there's going to be all these big name hikers there. And I'm just a little hiker. I don't do big, long trails. I don't do big miles. And I'm like, And so I went and I met amazing people and did amazing hiking. And one of the key people that I bonded with there was my friend Joan. And Joan and I became the team J&J. And we had a blast. Well, she was living in Georgia at the time, and she is a major hiker. She loves the wilderness. She is passionate about the wilderness. And she had time, and we got introduced to the Arizona Trail at that gathering. Well, we also, when we were both talking about going to the gathering, we were both new ambassadors, and we'd said, we're both a little bit intimidated. And I said, well, I'm going to drive. If you want to spend extra time in Utah while I'm there, let's do it. I'm going to explore while I'm there. So we agreed, she was going to stay, and we started exploring. And we spent, I think it was at least a couple weeks. And I had my car, and we would go to base camp. She had a hammock, and she would hammock camp while I slept in my car. And I'm like, I kind of like this, sleeping in the car at base camp. I don't have to sit up at 10. I can just crawl into my bed. And we hiked and I don't know if we backpacked, but we hiked and we did really well. We giggled, we laughed, we had a great time. We loved exploring together. So we set up let's see if we could do some of the Arizona Trail in a couple months. So sure enough, her parents were wintering in Arizona, and they became our trail angels. And we hiked the southern 300 miles of the Arizona Trail and absolutely had a blast. And it was something so outside my comfort zone. I would have never, ever said I would do the desert. I learned so many things about myself, about the desert, about what I could do to survive, what we call that cow tongue, cow slobber water. The best water ever. And, yeah, exactly. Green slime, cow poo. I learned about water flavorings. I would have never drank water flavorings. I don't like sweetness in my water, but you had to put something in there. It was yellow when you filtered it. You had to double.
Oh my Lord.
We double treated everything, but we had the best time, and I made great friends. And so then it just became this thing where I have all this time on my hands. I have all these places now that I want to go see. I filled up my map with all these, points of interest. And now I just go with the weather. Okay, it's early spring. I'm itchy. I'm ready to go. Usually I'm ready to go by the end of February. and I will plot a very loose routine. Like it's such a loose itinerary. And I will go like this. Since we're talking about coronavirus, we might as well talk about where I started my trip this year. And I was planning on seeing
why not?
wildflowers. Yeah. So I'm like, I love wildflowers. That's going to be my focus. And so I had all these places that have early season wildflowers on my map. And I started moving my way through Arizona and had been enjoying seeing and photographing and hiking around wildflowers. And then I knew I had time getting toward the southeastern corner because my next course was to go to New Mexico, where I would be seeing new stuff to me that I really hadn't been through before. And so I returned to a place called Chiricahua, a national monument in Chiricahua Wilderness, to do a lot of exploring when the coronavirus hit. And the nice thing is it's early season. And so it really isn't necessarily appropriate. It was still, early March, that there isn't really great backpacking, but it's great base hiking, day hiking opportunities. And so I learned like, oh, you could do this in your car. It doesn't matter that it drops to 20 degrees. Like you're okay. And you can get up and you can have your coffee and then you can go hike. And I started meeting people around the country. I had places. And then over time, I found that I don't like staying in motels at all. Like I have not stayed in a motel for 2 or 3 years. I would rather use my money to take a shower. I know where to go take showers.
Right.
And eat a good meal. Eat a good meal is really important. And that's when I knew when the coronavirus hit and I couldn't enjoy going to towns, I'm like, I'm over. This is done. It's time to go home.
So while we're talking, let's recap a little bit because I do have some questions about that because you similarly, even though basically you were living out of your vehicle at campgrounds, BLM land, wherever you were, you had to go through that process as well, just as through hikers, section hikers had to make their decisions to get off the trail as well. So let's recap just a little bit. So you grew up, basically your parents were wilderness people. You grew up, doing stuff outside. Your mom grew up at a fire tower, simply amazing. You started hiking with groups and getting familiarized with the Pacific Crest Trail, and you became the BeeKeeper Trail Angel, and that is phenomenal. You learned who you are as a hiker, and now we're to the point where you did some traveling with your friend from Georgia. You guys, took off the AZT, some miles on that. We all know we're not going to drink cow water now. And here we are, you're traveling, you're BeeKeeper Jan, the gypsy. You're just kicking off I call it your season because you and I were actually talking before you left, and I was going to try to interview you kind of in the middle of wherever you were, and we were going to have a conversation. But now walk us through hearing about the coronavirus and making that decision to come home, because you did make that decision to come home and you actually went through a quarantine yourself. So walk us through that process.
Yeah. So my very last resupply while I was still in Southeast Arizona is I had to bop over to New Mexico to get gas. And I was hoping to find some fresh produce. And it was just like 6 miles over the border. And I felt like a piranha. It was the most interesting feeling because I had really been isolated from the world. I didn't have very good cell service. The first thing that had happened was with the visitor center in the area I was at had posted the closure and said that I was actually there the morning they got the notification from the Forest Service saying they needed to shut down. Everything was kind of in disarray. It's run by volunteers. They live on the site. They're given RV pads and they didn't know what they were going to be doing. All these people were camped at the Forest Service campgrounds or dispersed camping. And everybody's just kind of like, we don't know what we're doing. The little places in town were confused and frustrated. So I bop over to New Mexico and I go to this gas station and I truly felt like a leper. And I'm like, whoa, okay, this is very uncomfortable. And it was just like, a little small mom and pop gas station. And they would have normally been like, yay, somebody's coming to spend some money because this is pretty remote. So there was another gas station like a mile down the road. And I'm like, I'll go try it. And it was the exact same response. And it was extremely uncomfortable. Like I always go in with smiles and hello and, tell me about something here, and they did not want anything to do with me. They stood back in a corner. They gave me the evil eye. And I knew like this is done. Like, this is not good. If people feel like I'm a leper because I have California plates, I certainly don't want to risk exposing myself or anybody else. I had been completely isolated from anybody while I was in the, background, just like the long distance hikers feel like they're currently at. They're through hikers, they're not with anybody. But knowing that I could get it from talking to somebody. And now I need to travel home. It's 2,000 miles. I'm going to take the most direct route possible, but I have to get gas. I have to stop at mini markets. I felt so germy. Like, it didn't matter. You're in your car. Every single thing you touch, you try, you wipe, you touch your steering wheel, you touch your phone, you touch your door handle, you wipe again. Like, I just didn't feel like I was germ free in my car. And so as soon as I got home, I was extremely conscientious of it. I stopped at the store. I stocked up for 2 weeks, and I locked myself in my house and my neighborhood. Basically, I did not drive. I did not talk to anybody. I stayed well more than 10 feet from anybody for those 14 days to make sure that I did not bring it back into my community. And I actually went closer to 3 weeks. I still have not gone back out into the grocery stores. I am having my groceries delivered. I have asthma and respiratory issues, and I could be part of that vulnerable society. I have no interest in going to the hospital. I want to stay healthy, happy, and be a hiker. So I choose to take advantage. Yeah, I'm choosing to take advantage of, those resources available. Something I've never had to use before, but guess what? It's there. And if I can pay somebody else's salary to keep me healthy, I'm going to do that. I feel extremely lucky. I know I'm one of the very few that can truly hibernate. I can still enjoy hiking and being outside and doing things and not have exposure because I don't have other people I live with. I don't have to take care of one-on-one things. I don't have regular appointments. I just am feel very, very fortunate that it's an easy situation for me. It's not pleasant, but it's easy.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I just heard last night, here we are at the beginning of May, basically, and California has extended again another month the stay at home. Am I correct on that? They just extended.
I did not hear it last night, but what I am hearing is the counties are all putting into place their opening back up expectations, and that they would be submitting those plans to the governor. And I heard they would be they were having, in my county, the Board of Supervisors meetings today, and that they all plan to start opening up May 1st. So I don't know how that's going to work with the governor's order if you heard a different one last night. Like I said, I didn't catch up on that, but I know that there's some businesses that are already being in defiances in my area. Mm-hmm. I'm starting to see that more and more. Doesn't seem to be any penalties in my state for doing that. I heard in Oregon, they actually snag your business license if you do that, which I think that,
wow,
you need to have a consequence. I don't think it's fair to have a barbershop open. What happens if somebody transfers it there? How close are you to somebody at their shampoo pole or whatever?
Right.
So it's going to be an interesting transition regardless. I plan to continue to treat it as if it is hot and it is in my face and everybody is still contagious. And I have no interest in assimilating for the summer. I'm going to try to stay pretty much in the wilderness.
Exactly. So let's go back real quick before we finish. There's 2 or 3 things I still want to talk about that I think are vitally important. And we can even talk about the aspect of this first thing. So I want to talk about the PCT Section Hiker Facebook page. And I also want to talk about your blog, because you have an amazing blog that I think people can go to right now and get enjoyment in this time that we're in, by reading your current post and going back and seeing about your adventures. But first, let's talk about why you started the PCT Section Hikers Facebook page and kind of the progression.
So I started it in, I think it was 2015, once I stopped working, and I realized, guess what? I want to hike these sections during off season, and I wonder what the conditions are like. And so I actually did my first long section, 300 miles in far northern California. And I started in May, and May is early. Like, we can't get into our snowy backcountry usually until much later, and some places in July. And it was a low snow year. And so I'm like, I'm just going to go try. So I did the first section, and when I blog about my sections on the PCT, because they're named with the alphabet, I have, of course, come up with titles for them. So the very first section that I did that time was section O. And it was O for obstacle course, off-season obstacles. I think that's what it was called. And there, I learned my lesson. Like, okay, you can get out here, but there hasn't been any trail maintenance, and there's going to be a lot of blowdown. And so I took pictures and I shared them on this Facebook group of, okay, this is what O's like, because other people are wanting to do O. And I know you've heard about now, the Hat Creek Rim is one of the early places that you can do fairly early season, at least between two areas. And so people are always looking for, where can I go? Where can I go? And people will say, you could do the Hat Creek Rim. But then I'm like, but then if you keep going, you might have the obstacles. And so we all started like sharing. And one of my other acquaintances, she did it. And she was just like, oh, that O was so awful. And the Hat Creek Rim, I always call it the, hellish hot Hat Creek Rim, because it's so hot during typical season. And I would never, ever do it during the hot season. Well, I ended up joining Mary for her section hike on that section N one year. So I haven't ever finished writing that post, but it's called Never Say Never, because I did it during the hot season.
Now, is that Mary Emmerich?
It is Mary Emmerich. And so that
okay. So if you guys will remember, Mary Emmerich was, I cannot remember her episode number right now, but she is actually on the podcast. So if you haven't, you need to go back and listen to Mary now. But continue, Jan.
Yeah. And so then I got through section O and I started section P. And P eventually became my patiently practicing persistence, because it ended up being broke into 3 sections, because I ran into a big amount of a cornice, snow, and there was no way. Like, I'm like, this is too dangerous. I can't do this. I have to turn back. And that was my first experience of like, you have to make the right choice. This is not okay, being solo, being out here. You don't have to do this right now. You have help. It's your community. So I was able to call for help. I actually, later, when I came back to do the next piece of that section, met a thru hiker. His name was Ugliest Cheerleader. I never did find out the story behind that name, but he, I know, we saw him when I went around to go do a different part of the section. And he said, I saw somebody's footprints up there and they stopped. He's like, but I had no snow experience, and I delved over that edge of snow. It was the scariest thing in my life. I am never hiking on snow again. I'm getting off. I can't even believe that. I wondered what happened to that hiker. And so we started sharing that on the PCT Hiker Network page. People felt like they were sort of ostracized on the thru hiker page. They felt like, it's an us versus them. And this is now their tribe. This is someplace they can come, feel comfortable, ask questions, learn about what sections they can do early season, and logistics. It's been great to find out, where can I park? And people will step up and say, I'd be happy to give you a ride from here to here, or can we switch keys? And so it's really been a great resource.
Well, that's great. And I love it because, like you said, a lot of times, and I've had other guests on the show that said the same thing you did. It's like the thru hiker versus the section hiker. And it really shouldn't be that way. But creating this page, it does give people like a sense of, okay, there's a bunch of section hikers on here. Nothing wrong with the thru hiker or section hiker or day hiker or weekender. But it does, it gives people a place to go who are like-minded, I guess, just like the thru hiker pages and everything else. And I absolutely love it. And your stories, I was sitting here listening to your stories that you were putting up on the PCT page, but that's your blog as well. Like your pictures are phenomenal. Yeah. So talk about your blog just a little bit and the name of your blog.
So the name of my blog is Jan's Jaunts. Is that right? Yeah. I'm like, wait, I've used so many different names now. Is that right? Yeah. Jan's Jaunts and Jabberings. Jan's Jaunts and Jabberings. But if you just put in Jan's Jaunts, it's easy to find. I started it because I was involved with the meetup group and I had been doing a lot of teaching and educating, which I love. I love mentoring and helping people shorten the learning curve. And I had done a few backpacking clinics. And I found that trying to condense that information into such a short period of time was overwhelming. It was too much. You couldn't give enough details, and yet you were feeling like you wanted to provide more details. And so rather than repeating it and trying to expect people to learn it in such a short period of time, I put together a backpacking kind of equipment overview options section in that blog to help the education. Since then, that piece has kind of fallen astray because then I started doing more about my local trails. One of the things while I was still working was I was doing hikes in my particular area during daylight savings time. Well, before daylight savings time, or whatever, during the winter, we would start the circle around my community and broaden it about local trails. And so I started putting links for all of our local trails so people in my meetup group could find them. And because people are always like, where do we hike? Where do we hike? And then as time went on, you could go further out. And so I did all this building of information for local trails. And then pretty soon it was wilderness trails. Okay, now I can talking about where you can go that's in the wilderness and where you could do day hikes and where you can do backpacking. And then I started traveling. And so then it became, you know what, these are really my stories and this is my blog. And so it has evolved over, like, I just want an introduction to people to say, if you want to go to Arizona, like, these are some options. What do you want? Like, what area do you want? What time of year do you want to be? Look at the pictures, see where you might want to go. And I try to include in my blogs. It's not a guide. It's not a, hiking book. It's definitely more of, these are the pictures, these are the stories. And I try to say, like, if there's any technical areas, just so people can be aware of, there might be a stream crossing, or there might be some exposure, or there might be a lot of rattlesnakes, those kind of things.
Right. And you definitely have a lot of information out there. So just to kind of recap, I mean, Jan, you've done 1,500 miles plus on the PCT. You've got 300 miles plus on the Arizona Trail. We didn't even get into the Continental Divide Trail. One of the things I want to ask you is, do you have plans, and I know you like to cherry pick, you're very open with that, of completing any of the trails, or are you more interested in sectioning wherever you want to go at this point where you are right now? I mean, I know you're sheltering at home, but in the future, do you have plans to totally complete any one of the trails?
I've always said no, but the same thing I always say, never say never. Right now, I still feel like that time clock is ticking on my life, and there's so many awesome places. And if people were to ask my style, I always say, like, I want that wow per mile, but I also want it when there's not a bazillion people around. I like the solitude. I like it when it's quiet and pristine, and it's my experience. And so seeking out those wow per mile places, there's still so many on my bucket list. I don't see myself saying I want to do all that in between stuff. I've done enough of the road walking on the CDT to be like, no, that's not really my thing. If I could spend 6 weeks in the winds, exploring every single trail and loving every minute of it, and knowing I only hit 1% of that wilderness versus spending 2 days walking through the winds, that I can't compare. I'm like, I felt so much passion getting to live the winds that whole summer and spending 6 weeks going between different trailheads. Like, that was magic.
I think I've said I love that 1,000 times on this episode, but I really do, because as we've talked about the progression of who you've become, really, as a hiker, as an adventurist, as someone who likes to explore the wild and the Wind River Range, every person that's been on the podcast that is a West Coast, so to speak, hiker has absolutely said it's a toss-up between the Wind River Range and the Sierra area of the PCT, and just exploring and hiking those areas. So I love it that you don't limit yourself to what you want to do, that you consider yourself, I've done a section of this, a section of that. And I really, really, really appreciate you, Jan, coming on the podcast. Everybody go out and join the PCT Section Hiker page on Facebook. Everybody go take a look at Jan's blog. I mean, I cannot begin to tell you the information that's on that blog. It is absolutely phenomenal. And now I think we've come to the point in the podcast where the guest is going to sign off for us by reading their own journal entry, statement, or quote that will inspire us to keep hiking section by section.
Okay, this journal entry is from the 9th day on the PCT in Oregon in 2018. And this was a very good and very bad day. I'm on trail well before sunrise, just me and my shadow. Soon, though, the camera finds purpose. From the grouse and marmot to the wildflowers of the Wikieup Plains, to the views of South Sister and her glacial moraine, to a view filled with lupin and another with monkey flowers. My heart was happy, a small creek welcome to sit. It was so peaceful and just what I needed to digest my first 9 days on trail and this absolutely perfect morning. As my break came to an end, new friends I met last night stopped for a chat. Small world, as cavemen and I discovered we went to the same high school. Much of our adult life was spent in nearby communities, and yet here we meet in Oregon on the PCT. It's a small world. Shortly thereafter, I fall. I yell help, and my new friend Hot Lips comes to my rescue. We connect with cavemen, and together they became my angels, foregoing their own hikes for my welfare. It's a small world. Leaving miles unwalked, my journey incomplete, I'll find my way back. It's a small world. The PCT awaits.
Jan, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the podcast. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for the patience with our technical difficulties. Great chatting.
All right. See you soon, Jan.
Okay. You too. Bye.
Wow. What an episode with Jaunting Jan. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, Jan, and sharing your journey, not only as a section hiker, but as a person who loves the outdoors and wants to explore our wilderness areas as much as possible. I am really glad our technical issues worked themselves out and we got to share a cup of coffee together and record this episode. I look forward to having you back on the podcast real soon. Before I sign off for this week, I wanted to share a decision with all of you that I have made that will affect the upcoming episodes of the podcast. I am taking the lead from our friend Mighty Blue and will be recording my section hiking this summer on the Appalachian Trail and sharing those episodes with you starting Saturday, June the 20th. Those episodes will be in real time, so to speak, and shared with you every Saturday as long as I am out on the trail. I went back and forth trying to make the decision on whether or not to section hike on the Appalachian Trail or head out to another trail that is on my to-do list. But as all of you are getting to know me, you know my heart belongs to the Appalachian Trail, and I am currently working on my second section hike of the trail. As the school year comes to a close and I have the summer off from teaching, it's time to section hike. And now I have an awesome platform with this podcast to share it with all of you. I am going to do what I have always done: hike responsibly, leave no trace, not use shelters or privies, wear a mask or a buff when needed, and practice social distancing. My goal will be to complete around 31 days or so of hiking that I need to do in order to fill in some gaps of trail that I am missing. If all goes well after those 31 days, I will have all of the trail complete again for a second time, with the exception of New Hampshire and Maine. And then hopefully in the summer of 2021, I can finish the trail again for a second section hike completion. If that's the case, it would be pretty cool to have completed the AT twice in 16 years. I will fill you in with more information on next week's episode, and then I will be out on the trail. I look forward to sharing my summer section hiking with all of you. I will also primarily be using Instagram to share what's going on with the hike as well. You can follow me there by going to @JesterHikes. You can also follow the Hiking Radio Network on Instagram by going to @Hiking Radio Network. Thanks for listening, everybody. If you want to reach out to me, you can always email me at JesterNC2212@gmail.com or send me a DM on Instagram And as always, happy section hiking.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night, heading toward the morning light. I wonder if you'd wander with me, and I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods. You're wondering if I go wandering with you, what kind of trouble we'll get ourselves into. Would it be wrong to tag along with a band of vagabonds? You wonder if I'd wander with you. So I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river. I'm wondering if you'd come wandering my way, if you ever get lost or if the trail leads you astray. The music of the pack can always bring you back. I wonder, can we wander away? And I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this football season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection for a wide variety of statistics, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and an enormous selection of players and stat options are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million football fans who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/get100 and use code GET100. That's code GET100 at prizepicks.com/get100 for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.